Mark Rogers TV talking SEC football, and just about the best way to do that is to bring in Peter Burns from the SEC Network. Peter, how you doing tonight?
A little sleep deprived. I got a little, I guess, 1 week old baby here at the house. So when I don't get any sleep, I'm studying SEC and college football. So I guess I'm probably as prepared and ill prepared as I'll ever be.
Sleep deprivation goes without saying. So if for those people out there that don't know, Peter and his lovely wife gave birth to a daughter, Bo Victoria Burns. Did I get that correct on Halloween?
That's correct, and you spell Bo a little bit different, B-E-A-U-X. So it's the Cajun flair in me that led to that name.
So Auburn fans don't get too excited.
Hey, listen, I'm from Baton Rouge, and my wife's so I'm a diehard LSU fan. She's a diehard Alabama fan. So we joked around about what school Bo's going to choose, and she'll probably go to Auburn. That way she ticks us off both. But no, I like Auburn, especially although the SEC may not like them too much because they could definitely throw a wrench in the whole college football playoff this weekend with the game against Georgia. Mark.
Definitely. We've often argued about the split household with the Burns there, Alabama versus LSU. And I guess the wife, of course, wins out because this is Nick Saban's birthday, Halloween.
That's right. That's what was so funny was when I was excited for Bo to be born on Halloween. I thought, what a cool birthday, and thinking about all the parties down the road, and she kind of looks at me and she goes, "You realize it's also Nick Saban's birthday." So that's when you know you live in a college football household, when your wife knows the coach's birthdays around the league.
And you know who's in charge, so it just had to happen that way as well.
Absolutely.
You know what the talk is, Peter, across the nation. It's concerning the SEC. Georgia, Alabama, both undefeated. It's very strange to be in the first week of November and have both division championships to a certain extent. One we know is locked away. The other one we think is locked away, although Auburn still definitely has life. So your thoughts about the way the college football playoff standings rest right now? And are you a proponent of we select the 4 best teams regardless of what we think we need to do in regards to conferences, or I need to look at track records and resumes and do the right thing, i.e. Wisconsin wins the Big Ten undefeated. We do the right thing and choose Wisconsin. Which side of the fence do you typically go?
I honestly think that you should select the best 4 teams no matter what happens, Mark. I mean, I think that's probably the most important thing, is that when we wanted the college football playoff, we wanted to say, hey, who's going to be the top 4 teams? We want them to play. I don't care what conference they're in. I will say this: a couple weeks ago, I went to Dallas. I sat in with Kirby Holcutt and Bill Hancock, and I did the mock selection committee. And we did, I think, the 2012 season. And that, of course, that was the year Alabama played Notre Dame, and Alabama absolutely destroyed the Irish. But I can remember going through the process and never once really thinking, oh, we've got 2 teams from this conference in. And so conferences never really came into play when I was actually doing the exercise. So I think it was all about, who are the best 4 teams that were in at that point. Now, I don't know which way the committee leans. I mean, because they say, hey, we value conference championships, but we also value head-to-head. We also value strength of record. We also strength of schedule, all kinds of things, the eye test. And really what it comes down to is that they don't know what direction they're headed until really the last week. I mean, they can kind of jockey people in position, but this is not like the old AP poll to where, hey, listen, if you were in there in week 7 and you just kept winning, you weren't going to fall. And I think what the College Football Playoff Committee did is just said, hey, you know what? We like this team at number 4 this week. Well, guess what? They didn't look very good against a bad opponent, a bad opponent. So we're going to drop them. So it's a lot more fluidity into the polls, which I like, because that's really what college football is. You can see a team that looks like the best team in the country, and then all of a sudden they don't. Or vice versa, if you got a team that's sitting there struggling and they just come out gangbusters, they're able to really make a move, whereas opposed in the old AP poll, it was just kind of a very molasses type ranking system to where you just had to slowly work your way up. And they're not going to know. I mean, it's chaotic what happened last weekend, especially to the Big Ten, but there could be chaos that reigns supreme this week in the SEC and even the Big 12. If TCU beats Oklahoma, my goodness, all of a sudden you're looking at, is TCU the team that could be in the Big 12? And does Auburn take out Georgia? And where does that a one-loss Georgia team rank? So we are on probably the second level of probably 15 different levels of the video game that is the college football playoff this season.
Peter Burns joining us from the SEC Network to break down the big games in the college football rankings for this week. The classic example of what you just pointed to in the old AP coaches poll style was 2004, because USC and Oklahoma started 1-2 or 1-3, something like that. And Auburn was like 19th in the preseason poll. So regardless of what Auburn did, they hit a ceiling because the other two kept winning. So they never got to compete for a national championship and were relegated to the Sugar Bowl, regardless of how anybody looked or what the track record was or the resume or the standing of the conference. They just hit the ceiling. I love we're tearing it apart each week and we're rebuilding and looking at the complete resume, because different teams have different. I'm not so much concerned with the performance as the track record and the resume, that different teams hit different stretches in their schedule in which they may face some difficult opponents back to back to back, and therefore they suddenly have a better resume in week 10 than week 7 versus some other team. And that's what I like about it.
Well, it kind of reminds me too, remember in the old BCS, all of a sudden you'd be watching, this Minnesota Northwestern game is interesting because if Minnesota wins, they're going to win their 6th game, all of a sudden that helps the bump up this poll in the BCS or this number, which may put this team above. You kind of have a little bit of that still in the college football playoff rankings, because now being in that room, I can tell you one of the numbers that comes up is wins against college football playoff top 25 teams. And that's a big number. And so when, right now the 1 through 4 really don't matter a ton, because there's going to be there's a lot of fluidity in it. I don't even know if fluidity is a word, but I keep throwing it out. Maybe I'm just sleep deprived, but I like the word. Maybe we can Google it, see if it works. But what happens, what's more important is kind of probably 15 through 25, because teams that aren't necessarily in the college football playoff discussion, maybe they have 2 losses, maybe they have 3 losses, heck, even 4 losses. But what happens is that if they move up to the top 25, then all of a sudden that's a major little green box that the committee will look at and go, hey, this team, Notre Dame or Clemson or Oklahoma, has 3-4 wins versus a top 25, whereas maybe Wisconsin doesn't. Maybe they only have 1 if they run the table. So these are all the factors that are going to come in, and it's not an easy job. I felt stressed doing it, and we were talking about a magical 2012 season. I can't imagine what the committee is going through as they see chaos each and every weekend.
Peter, what was your result or the committee's result or the fake committee there for the 2012 season?
Gosh, you know what? You bring it up. I know that we had, I think if I'm not mistaken, we had Notre Dame number 1. I'm looking it up on my phone right now because I remember taking a picture of it thinking, my goodness, this would be great. Yeah, so we ended up with Notre Dame at 1, Alabama at 2, which was understandable. We had Oregon at 3 and Florida at 4. Now, the difference is we also had Georgia and Stanford at 5 and 6. And what made that interesting is that we had Florida in, but that year I believe Georgia won the head-to-head. And we had Oregon in, but I think Stanford won the head-to-head. Or it was something like that, to where it was kind of crazy of what do you really value? Do you value head-to-head, or do you value, hey, this team hadn't played anybody? I think it was Florida, they had 1 win over the top 25, and Georgia had something like 6 wins. And that's the reason why I think they were in. I just saw how convoluted it can be, and it's a very difficult situation to be in.
I'm trying to sort that out in my head as well, Peter, because I thought I recalled that season very well. Well, being a college football junkie like all of us, I recall every season. But yeah, there was something interesting with the Georgia-Florida dynamic. Obviously, Georgia went to the championship game, but I thought Florida beat Georgia, but they lost. I forget what exactly happened. Georgia
that's what it was.
Won the head-to-head to get to the championship game.
Right, and that is kind of going back to what happened last year between Ohio State and Penn State, right? I mean, You're looking at teams that have the same record. Well, hey, Penn State won head-to-head. That should be easy, right? Well, Ohio State had much more on the other parts of the pluses than that happened with Penn State. So, I mean, I think that's – I don't know how much it'll play in this year. Of course, it may with Georgia Notre Dame. With Georgia going into South Bend and winning that game in front of touchdown Jesus by a point, okay, 1 point doesn't necessarily mean it was a 20-point blowout, to where if all things are tied, hey, you absolutely have to go with Georgia because they had an opportunity to play. Georgia went into South Bend and won by 20. Well, Georgia barely won that game. They did win it by a point, and the committee even said that's the best win to date in all of college football. But that's something that could play into where, how much do we value head-to-head versus the rest of the resume?
This is going to drive me nuts, but I'll look up the 2012 season afterwards because I know it's at the tip of my tongue.
Don't even worry about it, because there's 700 different scenarios that we still are trying to wrap our brain around for 2017. I wouldn't even worry about 2012. 2012 is long dead. Alabama reigns supreme.